Yippee-yi-yay.
You know, by the end of the show, we're going to be at the cocktail party happening with our South African friend, Abe Cambridge of the Sun Exchange. But right now, I'm doing my margarita for the Sats, Margs, and Orange Pill right here on Orange Pill
Sats,
Podcast.
Margs, and Margaritas. No, Sats, Margs, and Orange Pillarita.
Orange Pills, right. You know, one thing we talk about here all the time, Max, is, of course, that Renaissance 2.0 and the role of art in communicating and understanding the world around you and around us and building that world and also liberating us from oppression and horrible thoughts, right? And here's a headline that I think is a perfect analogy that you could look at it in many, many different ways as a metaphor for various things. Who did this? Yet another amateur art restorer in Spain has absolutely demolished a once beautiful artwork. There you can see that artwork is pretty bad. Once again, they say once again because, of course, we have two other examples of the Virgin Mary being restored and then re-restored to worse and worse. And then the first one happened in 2011 when we saw the restored created beast Jesus out of that Jesus icon. So it's a trend in Spain. And, you know, on the one hand, I think it keeps on happening in the same sort of cartoon over the top bizarre way that in some way, I think it might be a 4chan sort of art collective just messing with everybody.
Yeah, I think it's a K-shaped recovery. And what I mean by that is, the K-shaped recovery in the world is that due to COVID, you've got now a divergent path getting ever more divergent between those who are printing the money and those who are being the victims of printed money, right? So it's bifurcating. And here, I think in the art world, you've got the Orange Pill Show, which is going after the Renaissance 2.0. But here, you've got like a return to you could call it primitivism, right? So the images here are what you might find in a cave painting or something from 60 or 70,000 years ago, because going backwards, right? So the aesthetic that brought you the art to begin with is devolving because the societies around the world are no longer capable of carrying that aesthetic forward, right? It's slipping. They're experiencing aesthetic slippage.
Right. I think actually some of the oldest art that is like tens of thousands of years old, they're actually trying to communicate and they're through abstraction. This is something even different. It's like beyond the art, like going back. If the oldest art is in those caves in India, and that might be up to 700,000 BC, it's before that, like whatever creatures we were before that. And for me, like I look at these masterpieces turned into these fuzzy blobs of ordinary. That reminds me of our monetary system, our political systems. We started with masterpieces inspired by the ancient Greeks, and then, some ancient Rome, and then the Renaissance, and then the Enlightenment, the French Enlightenment. We started with these high ideals. And then we have today what we have today. This is the goopy mess that is our democracy, our so-called democracy.
Well, it's like negative interest rates, right? So interest rates have been around for hundreds of years, thousands of years, and it's a very elegant scheme where the longer you borrow money for, the higher the interest rate is. It's called the yield curve. And as the credit is not particularly creditworthy, the risk goes up and therefore the interest paid is higher. And it worked for many hundreds of years, 1,000 years. Within the last 20 years, though, we decided that that elegant solution for capital markets was no longer adequate. And so we must create negative interest rates. Negative interest rates imply we're going backwards in time, that money has a negative value, and it's causing wide-scale bankruptcy around the world. The total nominal amount of sovereign bonds with negative rates now has hit a new all-time high. So that trend is continuing to go higher.
Right. I mean, again, so I said, we started with the political system inspired by the masters of ancient Greece and the Enlightenment ideals of France and Scotland. But then we, as you're saying, like we had free markets. We based our economy on the notion of free markets. And then, of course, the Fed did come in like these amateur restorers to say, no, okay, well, the market isn't perfect because I don't like that outcome. So we're going to tinker a little bit, like there's a bit of oxidation there or a bit of like, maybe the artist didn't quite get the color of the eyes right or something that they think. So we're going to fix it a little bit to make it more appealing to the participants in this market. And now after all the interest rate cuts, all the interventions, all the quantitative easing, all the loading of bad debts onto the public balance sheet. Like we literally have that. Like that's what we have now. Those are the financial markets.
Right. In keeping with this bond market theme, right, you had a developed market for student loans over 10, 15 years. And there is an elegant way to handle that market within a capitalist economy. But now we're hearing that they're just going to erase student debt completely, which is like restoring art in this manner, where you're just ham-handedly, recklessly poking at something that was working because you don't understand it to begin with. You have no aesthetic to begin with, and you're just creating a ruin. This is not dissimilar to when those statues were toppled in Afghanistan and elsewhere due to the destructive, actions.
The Taliban.
The Taliban, right? And this is just really
vandalism.
Vandalism. It's financial vandalism. Is going on at the same time. The thing about art and the thing about history is that if an art degrades over time, or let's say the ancient ruins of Greece or in Rome, when you go to visit those ruins, they're not aesthetically displeasing. In fact, they have their own aesthetic. The way the Greek temples, for example, we saw a lot in Sardinia, actually. There's a lot of Greek temples in Sardinia. The way that they become ruins, the way that they decay, the way that they fall to the elements in itself is a beautiful aesthetic to that as well, because you see what really was standing, what got worn away, and it has its own beauty in a way. It's not less aesthetically pleasing than the finished product was in its original form. It's a new aesthetic pleasure that you can experience. That's why people travel around the world visiting ruins. Why do people go to see ruins? Why do they go to see the pyramids in Cairo, in Egypt, right? They don't, all the sheen is broken, right? All the fine, they used to be covered in a fine layer of rock, right? That's all blown away. It's all, why do they go visit them, right? Because they still hold power. Art is art, even if it's in a state of decay. It still has an aesthetic power that you can still communicate. To monkey around with that is vandalism. And we see it in the financial world, we see it in the art world, we see it all over the place because we're going backwards in time. And that's what negative interest rates tell us. We're going back in time. We're going back to the primordial soup of non-consciousness. That's what's happening right now, except for the Bitcoin, which is taking us to Renaissance 2.0. You have a choice.
Right. I know. In fact, Bitcoin is the opposite. It's taking that pile of mush that is the fiat currency system and the fiat dark ages and bringing us to a higher place. And that's what, for example, the Italian Renaissance did, right? I mean, it was the dark ages out of which they emerged with these masterpieces of art, which are still held today. I mean, imagine if somebody tried to, Da Vinci himself did not finish the Mona Lisa, but do you think there's anybody alive today who was like, I know how to finish it. I know what Da Vinci, how to finish this piece here.
Yeah, exactly. This is sad, a sad development. It shows that the accumulative wisdom of the ages is being completely destroyed and vandalized and going down the memory hole. And society and civilization as we know it is being deleted conveniently for the casino gulag operators and controllers who want us stuck in our house clicking on ads, gambling for a Scooby snack to survive yet another 12 hours.
Yeah, and you could see this everywhere. I mean, this is a perfect metaphor and analogy for everything, like Hollywood. Our Hollywood films used to be amazing. Now they're all these like cartoons, right? They're these blobby cartoons that you can't remember at the end of the day what the message was or what it was all about, or it's not speaking, it's not communicating the the ideas of the culture. Maybe television is a little bit better. It says more and reflects more.
Why is all this happening in Spain?
I don't know, but it's like the vandalism of good intentions. These are like three people who are amateur restorers. The official body of art restorers said this is not good work. I don't think we needed the official body to tell us that is not good work.
Now in France, they have when we were living in Paris, for example, we learned about the prospiracy. So these are typically university students that break into cathedrals or monuments, and where it's broken and there's a brick missing or something happening, they work to restore it actually and do it in a way that nobody really notices. They do it completely under the radar. They break in at night. If there's plaster that's broken or something, they'll replaster it and they'll fix it and then they'll leave. That makes some sense. But I think people in France grow up with an aesthetic from day one. That's part of what being French is all about. It's an exceptional country. It's an exceptional culture. In Spain, I guess they left that out of the curriculum. And there's a lot of people who think that everything should look like a McDonald's logo.
Well, this would definitely never, ever happen in France. And I very much doubt it would ever happen in Italy as well. So you're right that it's like unique to Spain, and there should be some sort of law against allowing this to happen and to destroy these masterpieces. But I want to turn to this next tweet here. And again, like, leave your thoughts about that. I kind of feel like it could be a subversive art movement out of 4chan. It could be something that they're like, it's a commentary on like what we're just saying. Like their comment, this is what they mean. They sent this message to us on Orange Pill to convey this about the degradation and the vandalism of good intentions upon our free markets and our free republics.
Well, speaking of France, they did have a culture minister there for a while, Jacques Attali, and they recognized graffiti as an art form, and that was controversial at the time. And although it did kind of give rise to the people like Banksy and others. Who's that guy, Perry? Joe Perry? No.
Joe Perry's from Aerosmith.
Who's that graffiti artist? We saw him in Los Angeles at the down in the graffiti area, at that area in Florida. I'm sorry, in the Miami. Perry somebody. He did the famous Obama image.
Oh yeah. Well, while Max tries to remember, I'm going to Google it.
Yeah, Perry.
Okay, that's our
Perry.
Yeah, don't say, because that's never right, and we'll just get stuck on Perry and Joe Perry. Joe Perry's a good guitarist.
Over at Aerosmith.
Those Twins. The Twins is the new Trends. They did a really good. They listened to Dream On, and they're really good on Dream On. They were like. The guy, just one of the two brothers did it, and he was over the top about, who's this guy on the guitar, man? This is amazing.
Oh, yeah.
So graffiti artist, it's starting to enter my mind. Obama.
Perry.
No, it's not Perry.
No?
It's Shepard Fairey.
Oh, Fairey. Okay.
Shepard Fairey.
Shepard Fairey.
Shepard Fairey.
Yeah, so
what
that
say about him?
Well, I'm just saying he's part of the graffiti movement of graffiti as art. That's really, I think, Jacques Attali started that in France when he, saying that graffiti is an art form.
But Jean Basquiat, Keith Haring, also,
exactly.
Of course,
Keith Haring, huge in the '80s, and so that's, you have to weigh that against this vandalism. So is graffiti, graduated from being patently vandalistic to being art form. And then this is fine art that's being clearly vandalized.
Right. Keith Haring actually had a piece. Again, like I'm going to Google Live. Sorry, we're like old folks here with our margaritas. I can't remember his artwork he did, but Keith Haring did one that the city of New York, he got arrested for doing this. And he was already super famous. And he created this artwork. And it was considered graffiti by the police. But now it's not. But so look him up. He's interesting. But I'm going to turn to some tweets about the hope for 2021. Max and Stacy drunk AF raving to the Orange Pill podcast intro music is pretty much how I see this next year going for Bitcoin. We are supposed to be interviewing Sean Lennon on this episode of Orange Pill podcast. And there's some, we're trying to get a hold of him. There's storms here and electricity going out and stuff like that. So we'll have him on here. But what do you think about that, Max? 2021 Orange Pill podcast theme tune is the theme for 2021.
Oh, definitely. It's a snappy tune. I think obviously Baby Shark is the most downloaded tune on YouTube. It displaced Despacito, I think it's the name of the tune. And it's got like 8 billion views. The Orange Pill theme music, I think it's going to have to get to 10 billion views to be the most downloaded piece of music in YouTube history. So I think we're getting close. We're over 30,000 right now.
Right. And we are running out of time in this segment. So we're going to throw to our little segment here with Abe Cambridge. We're kind of doing it all in reverse because we're still organizing the Sean Lennon interview. But right now, here is a clip from Abe Cambridge. And then by the end of this episode, you're going to actually be having cocktails with Abe Cambridge. It's pretty wild.
There is no spoon. We've had a surprisingly large number of people inquire as to why we should bother transitioning to solar and wind energy when we've got perfectly well-functioning energy grids that are already built. Well, that's fine to ask if you're in a well-developed country like the United States or any nation in Europe, but what about the hundreds of millions of people around the world in emerging markets that don't have access to electricity yet? This is very similar to the principle of asking why we would bother to use Bitcoin when we can send money from bank to bank very easily. But what about the millions of people that have to physically cross borders carrying money because they simply don't have financial services to transmit money back home? Bitcoin is good for that, and solar energy is good for getting energy into areas where it hasn't been previously been deployed and in a faster and cheaper manner. Now, Africa currently has 6.6 gigawatts of solar power installed on a continent that straddles both hemispheres, so it is always going to be receiving summer sun at some time of the year. But that's only 1% of the solar power deployed onto the entire planet. Now look at a country such as Zimbabwe. Only 34% of their entire population have access to electricity, something that in the developed world we take completely for granted. Now, Zimbabwe is also one of the sunniest countries on the planet. It's a very high altitude, which means they've got perfect solar irradiation. Now, working to their advantage is the fact that they do not yet have an electricity grid built. They can go straight to the cutting edge. Projects such as the one being delivered by Sun Exchange at the moment is to deploy solar plus battery storage into a large-scale agricultural facility where they are doing cold storage to transfer and transport food around the world grown in their farm, an industry essential for economic development in that country. Now they're being transitioned from running expensive and noisy diesel generators directly to using solar with storage capacity. We're deploying megawatt scale batteries into Zimbabwe to enable 24-hour access to clean and affordable and reliable solar energy. And this is the first of many projects you're going to see very soon being deployed out in a large scale across the African continent. Africa is going solar. They do not need to go through the normal process of going through fossil fuels, nuclear, gas and oil. They can go straight to solar power.
Right. And remember to visit thesunexchange.com/orange pill, thesunexchange.com/orange pill. I love Abe Cambridge because he's always got a positive message. And I think this is a pretty positive message. It's a massive project that thesunexchange.com/orange pill is launching in Zimbabwe. And of course, that is the classic cycle of history, as we're always covering the cycles of history, how rising powers are able to overtake declining powers, because your systems in place that you have so much time and money invested in starts to decay, while somebody without any infrastructure, whether it's broadband or monetary services, banking systems, like Africa's been able to leapfrog much of America for sure in terms of infrastructure and these phone like credits and stuff like that as money. And here Zimbabwe could leapfrog ahead and skip the whole, oil era, the carbon era.
Yeah, it's amazing what crypto and solar is doing. So we're seeing it.
By the way, just so you know, we're going to keep on recording through this. I can't stop them from doing this. It's like there's emergency flood warnings. Just so you know, don't be upset about it, but it's going to happen. There's like some storm passing through the end of Eta.
I'm alarmed.
Well, you should be alarmed because it's an alarm.
And so it's really incredible. In Africa, you've got crypto, Bitcoin, solar is really transforming in different areas. With Nigeria is like 30% hyper Bitcoinization already. You've got South Africa and now Zimbabwe, thanks to the Sun Exchange, are now going solar, and of course with Bitcoin. And Iran is getting into Bitcoin. Other countries are getting into Bitcoin. So the wave of Bitcoinization, hyper-Bitcoinization, and solar is really taking foot. I mean, it's not happening in the United States because I think that they are blind to what's going on in these other countries.
Right. And speaking of Bitcoin, by the way, I have this chart here, and this is really important. We're going to need more Bitcoin, folks. Square is selling twice as much Bitcoin as is being made. Square Bitcoin sales in the third quarter, 163,000, which is twice as much as the Bitcoin mined in Q3, and that's 81,000. So, we're going to run out of Bitcoin, and that's important because I think it makes it even harder money, right? And it's going to create even stronger men and women, and it's going to create even more competition for good, because you're not going to be able to get away with selling, Beast Christ or Monkey Christ, as I think it's Beast Jesus or Monkey Christ is the artwork created out of the masterpiece in Spain. Is you're not going to be able to get away with passing off that dreck onto people in exchange for, somebody will give you fiat for anything, but they're not going to give you Bitcoin.
Right. We're running out of Bitcoin under $30,000 per coin. I think that's a pretty safe statement. And a lot of these people who are buying it are not going to, like Michael Saylor at MicroStrategy said, they plan to hold on to it for 100 years, right? So once it goes into these corporate balance sheets or these hodlers, you might not see it again until its price is over 100,000 or so. And if you've got these big strategic buyers picking it up directly from the miners, then you're not going to see any in the retail market. So how are you going to get any? And so that could happen pretty quickly.
During the break there, I did go to Wikipedia, and I found the story I wanted to tell you about. Keith Haring. Crack is Whack mural was created in 1986 and is visible from New York's FDR Drive. It was originally considered as vandalism by the New York Police Department, and Haring was arrested, but after local media outlets picked up the story, Haring was released on a lesser charge. While in jail, Haring's original work was vandalized. This mural is an example of Haring's use of consciousness raising rather than consumerism. Crack is whack rather than Coke is it.
Remember that magazine we used to look at in the UK, Adbusters?
Yeah.
And they had this whole idea of culture jamming, where and the Yes Men, who we know and talked to a few times, they're very good at this idea of culture jamming. So you're taking the existing cultural and you're taking the images of culture and you're repurposing them and reinventing them and kind of fooling people to get in to see things in a different way. And that's always been a fascinating topic, really, for me to investigate over the years.
Well, that sort of culture jamming is art, like those words that I just mentioned of vandalism and arrested for vandalism, and then his artwork was vandalized. So, who's the vandals here? Who are the vandals? And I think that's an important question to ask as you're looking at whether you're tuning into cable news or listening to Jerome Powell speak to Congress. Like, who are the vandals? What is being vandalized, and who is the vandal?
I think this type of graffiti art always poses the question whether the graffiti is being attacked by the authorities because A, it's destructive or vandalism in some way, or B, the message is subversive and not in keeping with the official government line, right? So it's a kind of a fine line between the two. And certainly Banksy, is a great example of this. I mean, his art is his graffiti, that carries such important and potent political messages, but he does so in a way that it's not overt and it's subtle. And anyway, that's always the question, I think. And I think a lot of artists in the past have been motivated by this need to bypass the censors, because censorship has always been with us, and therefore it needs to be challenged continuously in terms of exploring art, exploring speech, and everything that comes with that. So we need to be careful by not censoring out everything except the government official line, because then you have an extremely monoculture, which is not keeping with our nature.
Right. I think art fulfills so many things. It's just simple communication. Maybe the cave art in France is about, hey, the warning, these are the animals you're going to see out there, the creatures out there. This is what they look like. It could be, it's transcendence, about transcendence and abstraction. The art that you saw in the oldest Homo sapien art is from in Indonesia, and caves found there, and it's all those hands, like a wall of hands with they had sprayed red dye around it, and it seems kind of fun. You almost feel like you're in the moment looking at it and just saying, "Hey, we were here. Like we were here. Like these are your ancestors. They are our ancestors." It was like from 40,000 BC, close to 40,000 BC that they were there. Mm-hmm. And that always reminded me of when they have some great documentaries of the late the 70s in New York City, when all the graffiti, when the hip hop was first being born in the Bronx, and all those trains you would see crossing from uptown to downtown, just plastered with graffiti, sent from the Bronx, sent from uptown. And it was like them communicating to the no-go for Black people back then, and the minorities up in the Bronx. Like Manhattan was a no-go zone, right? You couldn't go down there, but they were like, "Hey, we're up here." Like it was the same thing as those hands on the cave wall. Is like they were sending a message to Manhattan saying, "We're here."
Yeah, that's definitely, send that puppy downtown. See what they have to say about this. That's for sure.
Right. And some art is, communicating to you, like helping you transition through this a period, and seeing, like with the Renaissance, what had been banned for the whole Dark Ages was knowledge of the ancient Greeks, essentially. So you didn't know about all their art and philosophy. And the Catholic Church had kind of, you weren't taught it. It wasn't known. And the masters of the Renaissance spread this knowledge, essentially, reminded people of the classics, reminded people of the beauty that is man and humans, rather than the ugliness that is humans.
Seems like we always come back to this idea of natural law, mm-hmm. that humans are within the ecosystem of nature, and whenever they try to escape, it's tragic, right? I mean, the laws of drama, there's one which is man versus nature, right? Whereas man versus man, man versus nature, man versus himself. Those are the three primary storylines of drama. And so this story of man versus nature, of course, the one of the wax wings flying to the sun is a classic example of the tragedy that ensues. And I think even today, we're so modern with our electronics and whatnot. It's still inescapably part of nature. And when we try to escape nature, it ends in tragedy.
Right. And but that's the thing, is we don't really have anybody communicating that anymore. I think Orange Pill Podcast tries to do that, but the beauty of just life and cycles and humans, and We have a vast majority of the media and the entertainment complex by which, if the medium is the message, the medium currently that is the message delivering the news, you have these news networks, the medium being news delivery. Their presenters are CIA, NSA, FBI agents, and they're telling you are deplorable and you're not needed in this economy, and you're not wanted, and you're fascist Nazi scum and you should be eliminated, essentially, is basically they're projecting who they are. And in a way, it's art in a way that they're like a tragic Shakespearean character, right? I mean, you know what? Shakespeare is obviously the greatest playwright in history, right? And that's the contribution of England to the world. And one thing I had this professor called John Stepling. He was, a well-known, off-Broadway sort of, fringe theater sort of playwright. And he had said to me when I was taking this playwriting class that the last great playwright was Jean Genet, and there haven't been any since because, since, he was active in the 30s, 40s, and 50s, that everybody's middle class now, and you don't, essentially now you don't want to be deplatformed, you want a pension, you want to be respectable, you want to get a job at the New Yorker. But he was genuinely didn't care and genuinely gave away all his money and genuinely just lived as a vagabond and did everything he could to get arrested so he could be thrown in jail because he liked being he liked prison sex. And, so he was just he talked about it. So he was just outside of any norms of proper society. And few are willing to do that. In the Renaissance, all those guys risked, being drawn and quartered. That was the times of the Inquisition.
Yeah. The theater of the people, Bertolt Brecht, and others who were reflection of the working class. This has been kind of pushed aside. I mean, you'll see a great, American drama from 50 years ago or something presented as a classic. But it becomes, as I've said before, all kabuki theater where, the cable news is they're heavily made up and they go and their gestures are exaggerated. And, the storyline is always exactly the same. And defense contractors are good and human rights are bad. That's what we hear on the American cable every day. And everyone knows it. And it's satisfying to hear the same story every time, like a bedtime story, but it's not dramatic. It's not artistic. It's not life affirming. It's not even natural.
Yeah. And I just think about this all the time that it's not a bigger story that all these FBI, NSA, and CIA agents are literally news presenters on the news. And when you think of Marshall McLuhan and the medium is the message, and you think COINTELPRO is the news, and you're just it's so mind-blowing. And it just seems amazing that there aren't the equivalent of Alan Pakula and all these great, the American art, if Shakespeare is England and, Da Vinci and Michelangelo are Italian great art, and the philosophers of the French Enlightenment are really the French art. And, America has freaking movies. We are the great myth makers and destroyers. And yet, where is that art today for this time? Where is it?
Or Fassbinder, who is a great German director, and really got into the day-to-day life of the working class. And John Cassavetes, we talked about already. He really presented ordinary lives. And but this is considered now deplorables, right? People who are not part of the she cable news, overweaned, milk-fed, kabuki theater, hoi polloi junkies are considered malcontents and deplorables.
Yeah, and even the CIA has degraded because, they did famously finance Jackson Pollock, who didn't know that they were. Like the CIA were against the Soviet Union, thought like modern American art would like destroy the Soviet Union, which is pretty mind-blowing and interesting, right?
What?
Yeah, they financed all these modern. They pushed Jackson Pollock and a few of his cohorts, like really super famous, amazing master artists. But they didn't know. Jackson Pollock didn't know, but it was actually the CIA putting together their exhibitions until like their bosses were like, this is stupid, and it actually, because so many Americans turned during that whole McCarthy era against this modern American art, like they thought it was like decadent and disgusting and stupid. And so the CIA had to stop that program. But they're the ones that were, we have to get an expert on that. It's really fascinating. They were, Jackson Pollock had no idea, so he didn't know that they were the ones pushing.
Yeah, I want to hear more of this story. This is interesting.
Yeah, they put together museum exhibitions. They got a very wealthy guy from the East Coast, New York or New Jersey or something, to act as the front man to like buy all this art and put on this exhibition. But it was actually the CIA fronting the whole thing. So, I mean, it's not like, but even they've lost faith. Like that seems amazing that they would look at this art and think, wow, this is going to fuck up our enemies. Like, and now they're just like, they've lost faith in the American people. Like they've just lost faith in themselves. Like all they do is promote Rachel Maddow. And that's like, how sad is that?
Well, it's become, calcified, right? So this happens in cultures all the time. They become, used to say Eurosclerotic, right? That sclerosis had gripped Europe, and Europe is a museum, and it's very intransigent. Am I saying that correctly? And it's very rigid, right? And so the U.S. is a mature country, and it's now, exhibiting signs of decay. And obviously, if you're electing as president a guy who many would consider to have senility, that's not a vibrant young country. It's not John F. Kennedy, is it? It's not Camelot. It's not the 1960s. It's the 21st century, and America's got two guys that were almost 80 years old. It's very Soviet Union-like. You remember the Soviets in those type of countries would have these 80-year-old guys, with medals down to their shorts and whatnot. This is what happens to countries. They get old, they wither, they die.
Well, that's why the cover of the Independent magazine in the United Kingdom with that great journalist, Robert Chalmers, who wrote a great book about Hunter S. Thompson. He was friends with Hunter S. Thompson and wrote a piece about Max Kaiser. And the reason why he wrote this piece about Max Kaiser, and I'm going to put on the screen here, hopefully, if I don't forget, hopefully. And if I do forget to put it right here on the screen, just complain to me in the YouTube comments. But the fact is that Robert Chalmers said, rip it up and start again, right? Like that is the method that's what happened at the Renaissance. That's what happened with Max Kaiser and Orange Pill podcasts. Like this is our theme. This is like, let it die. That's okay. Like this is a cycle of life. This is not something like people shriek so hard about it and say, Jerome Powell, you have to do anything you can to stop it from falling apart. Nancy Pelosi, like send as much MMT as possible to keep this system alive. And you're like, no, just let it fall apart. Look at all the bad outcomes that it has caused. Look at that monkey Christ. Like we don't want that. Like maybe just let it go away, throw it in the garbage and start again.
That's the natural law. There are laws of nature. And when we try to fight them, it's tragic. And that's been known for thousands of years. But it's a lesson that's never learned. And that becomes tragedy compounded. Tragedy to the power of tragedy. This is when things become ultra tragic and catastrophic and apocalyptic, when whole civilizations get wiped out because of their stupidities. Hopefully we can avoid that outcome and just have a normal reset where everything has to start from scratch.
Well, we're already doing that here on Orange Pill Podcast. We're doing it in the Bitcoin community. We're doing a peaceful revolution outside of the kings and monarchs, and they don't even know about us yet for the most part. Like as soon as Rachel Maddow starts looking at you and trying to like send the troops to you, that's when to get worried. But she doesn't see us yet.
Well,
And
on that front, there's one guy who is interesting, right? Ray Dalio, who's a big money manager, and he's come out with comments that he's slamming Bitcoin, and he's making, what we call FUD, fear, uncertainty, and doubt from 3 or 4 years ago, and repeating these old claims that have been invalidated for many years now. But when that hits like the MSNBC crowd, I'm very curious to see what happens because Bitcoin represents everything that the MSNBC crowd is against. So one day we're going to hear on one of those cable news outlets something about Bitcoin. It's not going to be favorable. It's going to be negative. And then okay, this is the next big battle.
well, art and and I believe Bitcoin is subversive, and we're being subversive, and I don't deny that. And they should be afraid, but I'm glad they're not afraid yet because we could build stronger. We're polymaths. We're building a strong community around the world of all sorts of interesting people, and they can't take down thousands and thousands and thousands of people connected via peer-to-peer networks around the world. And I really hope we get to talk to Sean Lennon in this episode, but we're going to go to the cocktail party. I'm going to insert a clip from the cocktail party, but Sean is like pretty mind blowing in terms of, everybody knows him as a musician, but he's like a polymath sort of person in terms of how interested he is in so many different things and is just a really curious guy, and
he's an incredible artist, on his iPad thing. I remember with his finger, he just did like these drawings. I'm like, oh my God, that's incredible.
Yeah. Well, just like Da Vinci, he was, who could introduce himself as a painter, a war planner, and a musician. So now we're going to head to our sponsor, the sunexchange.com/orange pill. And I'm going to, we're not doing the cocktail party in real time until tomorrow, but I'm going to insert today, like after that, into the future, the cycle of life and the cycle of this conversation is going to. I am the god of Orange Pill Podcast episode 14.
I see.
So I can go into the future and back in time. I could also cut things. I could change your look. I could expand you and shrink you. Wow. I could do all sorts of stuff.
That's cool.
You'd be amazed.
All right. I'm into it.
It's like primitive art.
Don't do to me what that woman did to that artwork. I don't want to be aesthetically vandalized by your heavy-handed misappropriation of my reality.
Okay, let's go to this misappropriation of a reality in this time zone, in that we're going to go to the cocktail party. So welcome to the Orange Pill Podcast Party with Abe Cambridge of the sunexchange.com. Yeah, that's him up there, all in orange background, orange shirt, orange. You glad he joined us for this? That's like boomer comedy right there for you.
Yeah, it's a classic from 50 years ago.
So Abe Cambridge, let's throw to you here, and first introduce yourself to the group and tell them your background, how you got involved, how you became a solar punk, and why you founded and started the sunexchange.com/orange pill.
So hi, I'm Abe Cambridge. I'm the founder of the Sun Exchange, which you can go to sunexchange.com/orange pill. I'm in the solar industry, and more specifically, I'm in the crypto solar industry. I got into solar energy in about 2007, 2008. I did a climate change science degree at the University of East Anglia. I was pretty alarmed by the speed in which we can see climate change evidence all around the world in all different ways, whether it be depleting coral reefs, deforestation, the change of the reflectivity of the planet. The climate change has got many fingerprints all over the world. It's not just global warming. Global warming is like one element of it. And it was, if we are really going to be doing something, if we are going to change the world in a way that we're completely moving away from fossil fuels, that we need to move to a new energy source. And at the same time, I've also been into cryptocurrency since the very beginning, very aware of the link between fossil fuels and the existing financial system. So in about 2008, I was really observing what was going on. You've got these two parallel worlds emerging of decentralization. You've got a decentralized energy form, i.e. solar power, people being able to produce their own electricity from where they are in the world using a solar panel. And on the other side, you've got to be able to produce their own money, become their own bank using cryptocurrency. Two completely decentralized, universal pieces of technology. So I set up a solar installation company in the UK, a country not known for its sunshine, but at the same time, energy costs are quite expensive, so it was subsidized by the government. Now, I set up many installations around the UK so that we set up energy cooperatives. So where we would solar power like a community building or a school and enable people in the community to buy or invest into that project. And that the community of the school would get free electricity, and they'd basically be getting feed-in tariffs or subsidies from the government, and those subsidies would then go to the people that finance the solar power plant. Now, when the UK government changed and they started backing fracking, i.e. burning money, they decided to pull all the subsidies out of the renewable energy industry. So I actually visited Australia. My sister lived in Sydney. I went over there in 2013, saw that it's a very sunny country. I thought, well, surely it makes sense to start putting solar panels in countries where it's sunny and not where it's raining the whole time. So I quit from my old company en route back to the UK. I spent some time in Thailand and just realized there's no way going back to the UK was going to work for me. So I just resigned, but quit the company I'd set up in 2008 while sitting on a rooftop watching the sunset in New Year 2013. And then I kind of just realized I had to apply for a job. Although I've been running my own business, I thought I have to just get into the Southern Hemisphere. So I applied for a job in Australia. A few months later, I didn't hear from them. And then I got a phone call saying the job I'd applied for was no longer available in Australia, but they were opening a post in Cape Town. Would I like to take the job? And I was like, yeah, sure, why not? And then lo and behold, I found myself getting a job in Cape Town, arriving here. And as I was flying into Cape Town Airport for the first time, I was arriving with nothing but a mountain bike in my bag. I was looking out the window and I saw 0 solar panels on the roofs. I was like, why are we arriving in a country that's sunshine and we're working in the sun industry, but there's no solar panels on the roofs? And I started working on the industry and I realized that actually the problem is complete lack of access to finance. There was no money available. Debt's really expensive. Businesses don't want to use their own money to put solar panels on their own roofs. The government does not have zero incentive to subsidize solar energy because they literally own the coal mines and the coal power stations. So it really is the people just were not going solar. Getting money into and out of South Africa is extremely time consuming. I literally had to fill in paper forms and queue up in a bank to be able to submit money, which then take days and days to send and at high costs. So I started using Bitcoin to send payments. I sent my first Bitcoin payment in May 2014. My friend in London received it. He sent it back to me. I basically had exactly the same money. I sent like $10 to him. And he sent it back to me 20 minutes. I had round trip. I had the money back. And I thought, wow, this technology is exactly what we need to enable payments to get into South Africa and out again to finance solar power. So then we just need to come up with a business model that allowed individuals to be able to invest into solar projects, but in a way that was completely universal. Because if you were to invest into a solar project via equity or via a bond or via a debt finance, for example, you have to go through so many loopholes, and that's not loopholes, you have so many regulatory hurdles in order to comply with every single jurisdiction's lending laws around the world. So we need to come up with a universal model, and that universal model is direct ownership, i.e. if you own an asset and you have deed of title over the asset, you're entitled to lease that asset to somebody else on the other side of the planet. Now, if you get down to cryptocurrency, you can then work in microtransactions, like fractions of cents. You can now reduce the value of that asset that you own and lease it over much, much longer periods, which basically opens up the ability to micro-lease solar panels, i.e. solar panels down to the individual solar cells. You can buy a solar cell for $5 and lease it for over 20 years. So your monthly income is like millions of cents, but it does work. You can still receive that income and you can incrementally build up a virtual solar power plant. And actually the frequency of the payments that you can receive from your leasing your solar panel could be accelerated to almost instantaneously. Every 10 minutes, or even if you're using Lightning Network, you can receive money in real time from the point of electricity production to receiving the money in your wallet. So that's kind of the vision. Like, let's build this platform that allows completely global universal ownership of solar panels, where someone in the UK can buy a solar panel online and have it installed onto a rooftop in South Africa, The electricity your solar panel produces is purchased directly by the energy consumer, i.e. the school or the business that's using your solar panel. And that money goes back to you as a solar panel owner, all through the same platform. So we are not supplying electricity to the grid. We're directly supplying energy consumers behind the meter, because that means we're dealing with companies that we can speak to face to face, businesses that have been around for decades, schools that have been around for 100 years, and we do not need to work with really slow moving bureaucratic governments in order to deploy solar power. So that decentralized energy network is much stronger and more resilient when you distribute it over many rooftops and not just have one large solar power plant selling electricity to a utility grid. So there we go. We basically decentralized solar panel ownership, decentralized solar power generation, and using a decentralized currency in order to enable the whole thing.
When was your first project? When was the very first Sun Exchange project? And how is that doing today, all these years later?
So the first project we did was for the Stellenbosch Waldorf School. It was our pilot project. And we used some thin film panels, which we don't use anymore. We use silicon solar cells. And we also used a device called a power optimizer for each panel. So that solar power plant was the first one we did. Its performance is probably, it's probably completely honest, it's probably our worst performing solar power plant, unfortunately. It's probably about 75% of its target generation. But it was our pilot. It was just to demonstrate our model. And since then we've improved. But that's now been running for over 4 years. But the IRR on that's probably hit about 8%, 8% IRR, 10% IRR. But how we've refined our model is that we've drastically increased the level of technology and the designs of the power utilization and how to maximize the power production of a solar plant and the modeling of the power usage. So now we're up to, on our latest project, we're up to now like a 17% IRR, and we've moved the model to a fixed lease payment per solar cell. So now you buy a solar cell for our latest project, you're leasing that solar cell per month for a known price. So our other projects, you're selling electricity by the kilowatt hour, and that kilowatt hour production can vary. And now we're moving to a model where you're literally directly leasing a solar cell regardless of how much electricity it produces. So we're constantly improving, and now we're introducing storage systems. We're now putting battery packs into our solar power plants, so the electricity can be accessed 24 hours a day. Sometimes we find that there is surplus electricity, so a lot of our solar plants were designed to provide power Monday to Friday, but then at weekends there's no one there at the school or the business to utilize the electricity, so we've got all this surplus power. So with a battery you can store it. But another idea that we really want to get into is converting that surplus solar electricity into cryptocurrency. So one thing we're trying to explore is people who understand and have got competence in sort of small scale crypto mining, and then being able to deploy crypto mining hardware into our solar power plants to convert our surplus energy into another form of value. And so that's how we can maximize the performance of our other solar plants beyond the target returns. I mean, there's a slight deviation from your initial question, but the first question, our first project was 2014. 2016, sorry.
Right. So picking up on that mining thought there. So because when you describe it, it sounds kind of like mining anyway, because you're converting sunlight into Bitcoin, and the leasers are getting an income in Bitcoin directly from solar. It seems like a lot of people complain that they can't get into mining these days. It's too expensive. But this is like similar, and it is very, very accessible. But so the miners that I understand, they really are looking for costs to mine of like 2 cents per kilowatt, I believe, is the threshold where mining is at competitive. Abe, is that, do you think you can get to that level, or are you already at that level? How do you see that?
Yeah, I'm not sure we can quite yet compete with 2 cents a kilowatt hour. We can do that on a very large scale solar power plant. I think we're down to about 6 cents a kilowatt hour at the moment. So it's still entirely possible. It's still very, very low cost electricity. But I think we find that people, a lot of people use Sun Exchange for the first time. They've never used Bitcoin before. And some people actually sign up to Sun Exchange purely to get a passive income stream in Bitcoin. You're basically dollar cost averaging into Bitcoin. So over the years of you owning a solar panel, as Bitcoin value goes up and down, you're accumulating Bitcoin when the price is low, and then as it goes up, you've now got more earnings in your wallet, and you've still always got this physical object in the background that's generating value, which in itself has a return. So people are kind of doubling up on return using the platform to accumulate Bitcoin. And that's the first time people have used it. Some people don't want to invest in Bitcoin because it's too high a risk for them, but they're happy to buy a solar panel which earns the Bitcoin over time. Also, it gives people a way to utilize Bitcoin. Bitcoin, if you just sit on it forever and take it to your grave, what was the point? Utilizing some of it to put it to work actually makes it circulate, and we know money in circulation creates value. And as it moves, it just transfers value from one person to another, and you can actually make it do good things and put it to work. And obviously, the more it gets used, the more valuable the cryptocurrency becomes. So the more transactions there are, the more use case there is of Bitcoin, the price will go up anyway. So people realize now that this is an actual real use case, and to be utilized.
And go over the actual projects themselves. Like, explain to people what the costs are of electricity in South Africa and how much you reduce the cost to these actually end users, like these schools and vineyards and old folks' homes and stuff.
Yeah, the electricity tariffs in South Africa can be really quite complex. They have what's called time of use tariffs, whereby electricity in the weekend is very low cost. Electricity in the morning and evening is really expensive. Sometimes 6 times the price in the evening. You can up to 4 rand a kilowatt hour, which is around, let me just get my calculator out. So you're talking about like 25 US cents a kilowatt hour in the evening, and sometimes about 7 cents a kilowatt hour in the daytime. So if we can produce solar energy in the morning, which we can, or in the evening, depending where in the country, we can shave off that really high cost electricity. And also you find a lot of operations like a school, they'll work in the morning, their electricity load will increase over the day, and then at lunchtime it peaks, and then daytime it drops again. The solar power plant curve matches that exact same pattern. So we can actually reduce their maximum power demand from the grid. And a lot of people pay for power access. So they actually pay per kVA for accessing power from the grid. And so by us delivering solar power into their grid, we're reducing that demand, that power demand. I know, Max, I'm going to say the word struggle, but you were trying to get your head around the difference between power and energy. And I'm going to put it into this context. So power is like strength and energy is stamina. So we're kind of allowing people to offset. We're basically providing power. We're providing strength into their grid, and then that's basically offsetting their costs. And the longer we provide power, the more energy that they're getting. So their kilowatt hour, which is the unit of energy, that drops as well. So we're kind of saving them costs in 2 directions, from the power access and also the energy use. So those 2 things combined, we can almost halve people's energy costs in some instances. Especially when they're running diesel generators as backup. So our latest project in Zimbabwe, they have 6 hours of grid electricity a day. So for 18 hours a day, they have 0 power from the grid. And for the rest of the time, they're burning a diesel generator. And this diesel they're buying from petrol stations, which sometimes run out of fuel. There are queues all down the block to access these fuel stations. Not even guaranteed they're going to have fuel in stock. So when they can't get fuel for their diesel generator, the operation just has to shut. And these are operations which are essential to food security in the continent, which even feed supermarkets in the Middle East and Europe and South Africa. Chances are, if you've ever eaten some blueberries with Zimbabwe on the name, you've been buying blueberries from this farm we're now powering, which is part of the cold chain. So we're reducing their costs by 60%. From their existing energy, because of course there's a cost of unserved energy. I mean, the cost of replacing energy is one thing, but the cost of them not having energy is a whole other thing. So we're reducing their operating costs with the combination of reducing their fuel costs and giving them power when they don't have power. That's now cutting their cost by 60%, and that's a breakthrough, because Zimbabwe has been a challenged nation. And agriculture is absolutely essential to development. There's 65% of the jobs in Zimbabwe are in agriculture. And if that country can't get energy, then they can't export their goods, which means we can't get fruit and they can't have jobs. So by solar powering their operation, they've now got 100% reliable energy using solar energy and a lithium iron phosphate battery tied in with a diesel generator for backup. And then also they do have a grid which charges the battery when the solar power plant just isn't required. So it's a really smart system. It's a microgrid system, and it's the future.
Right. Abe, you said something that I thought was just great, and it's something to really think about. You point out, and this is something I think you came up with. We're moving from a world of limited energy and infinite money to a world of infinite energy and finite money. Can you just talk about that?
Yeah, I mean, just look where we've come from. We've come from going after literally a finite resource, going through extraordinary lengths to extract the last bits of fossil fuels around the world, to the point where in extracting oil from shale sands in Canada, we're chopping down whole rainforests to grow palm oil. This is desperate, and the harder it is to extract the last remnants of fossil fuels, the price is going to go up. At the same time, money is just being printed out of nowhere, devaluing currency. We've got infinite, there's an infinite supply of money. And at the same time, we've got this finite supply of energy. So the two things are going in the opposite direction. Your money is becoming less valuable and the energy is becoming more expensive. So the gap between energy affordability is going to increase. So this principle of energy poverty is only going to get worse and worse unless, and it's not even unless, because we already are transitioning to the opposite system, where cryptocurrency is a finite resource and it becomes more valuable over time. And then we're switching to an energy form like solar power, which the more people use it, the cheaper it becomes, because the costs of production of solar panel decrease the more people use it. It's a commodity. So now we're moving to a world where your money is becoming more valuable and the energy you're buying becomes cheaper and cheaper. And that's a beautiful future, because it basically means that we're switching to a completely passive solid state economy where our money is not backed by the value of nothing or gold in the ground, which took actually more energy to make than Bitcoin. And then you're also moving to a world where your electricity is just passive. I mean, if you've ever seen a solar panel, it still boggles my mind how magic it is that you can have a solar panel 1.5 square meters and it's producing 300 watts of power. Now, if you've ever been on those bicycles and you can pedal on it and it displays how many watts you're generating, I dare you to go and try and generate 300 watts. I don't think even, was it Lance Armstrong? I don't think even when he's completely on top of his form was he able to generate more than 200 watts. So, and the fact that you can put a solar panel in the sunshine and you can't feel the sun, it's invisible, you can't feel it, but yet you put a solar panel there and you can produce 300 watts. It's remarkable.
Right. So that cocktail party was pretty amazing. I love the Amarula. I can have it all the time. And as I said on our microdose this past week, like it reminds me of the time when you're free to travel and when you're free to drink at any time. I was going to say at any age. And, and people accept it. So that I'm sure this cocktail party that I just inserted, I think it probably went pretty well.
Oh yeah. It's great on pancakes. That Amarula stuff. Amarula, yeah.
My fear was of a chat roulette situation that many people seem to have forgotten. It's amazing how much people forget in a very short time, right? So, like, I was on Bitcoin Magazine, their last cocktail party of lockdown, and I realized that all of the other 4 or 5 guests, like, none of them knew what the 5th of November was, what Guy Fawkes Day was, and Occupy Wall Street. None of them knew.
Really? Even Occupy Wall Street memory hold? Wow.
That was 2008, 9, 10. So yeah, that's 10 years ago. And if you're only 25, you were 15, you don't notice it, you don't care about it. And so I was the only one who had anything to say about it because nobody else knew what it was. So I was like, yeah, okay. And those were Guy Fawkes always reminds me of the funniest moment I was with Max when we first arrived in London. And right before, it must have been like September or October of like 2004. And Max, we came into the London Underground, and there were these little kids in there going, penny for the guy, and had a little bucket. And Max was so upset. Like, I could tell, I know his body language so well. I could see he was so upset that, like, these were like Dickensian street urchins.
Dickensian street urchins and ruffians shaking me down.
For a penny. And he was just like,
for a penny. And I'm like, man, what century is this? Scat, you young ruffians. I've got business to attend to.
It It was one of the funniest.
Yeah, it sounded so alien. It was like a voice from another century. And, it was just startling. It's one of those great moments when, you're traveling around and you just meet things, see things you would never see otherwise.
But make sure to check out thesunexchange.com/orange pill. And now we're about to go to our interview to wrap up with Sean Lennon.
Hopefully.
All right. Well, Max, guess what?
What?
We are not here with Sean Lennon, but we are here with another masterpiece. We're not replacing a masterpiece interview with a masterpiece musician with a blobby, monkey Christ, like the photos, the medieval paintings over in Spain. No, we are replacing the masterpiece of Sean Lennon with the masterpiece of philosophy, and that is Aleks Svetski. Aleks, welcome to the show.
Thank you. I'm glad I'm not part of the today's modern progressives, because everything seems to have progressed to hell in today's day and age.
That's what we're saying is it's really fascinating that I found you. We were communicating on Telegram as we were actually, Max and I, recording this first bit of Orange Pill podcast, and we were looking at these medieval masterpieces turned into there's Christ, icon of Christ turned into monkey Christ. There is this statue of the Virgin Mary turned into whatever this Play-Doh thing is. And, we were saying that's very similar to what's happened to our monetary and political and geopolitical systems. Is like in America, we started out with, this constitution based off of the French Enlightenment ideas and ancient Greek Republic ideas. And now, like, as we keep on hiring politicians to fix it and do something and make things better for everybody, it's gotten worse and worse and worse till the point where we end up with something like this. So explain your piece, America is Dead. And I want to say, like, the synchronicity of this is amazing because you start off with this image, how it started, how it's going. And literally that's exactly what we've been covering for this first half, not even knowing that we were going to be speaking to you right now.
Yeah, classic. I mean, it was funny when I wrote this article, I was like, I need a headline image, and it just like, I thought, what's iconic for America, and obviously the Mount Rushmore is, and then I was just looking for like, what's deranged online, and I just typed in Land of Confusion, and that popped up. So it's apparently like some show or something. I've never heard of it, but I was like,
spitting
holy
image,
shit, this is perfect.
Yeah.
So like I kind of like slapped them together, and I thought this like exemplifies modernity better than anything else I've seen. But yeah, I mean, I think what you said earlier is like, America started off as this idea of based on a set of principles, and I've always particularly the more mature I've gotten, and I think Bitcoin's helped me mature like a lot in the last few years, is you find that in life there's few principles, like there's millions of opinions. Like everybody's got an opinion, like in the same way everyone's got a butthole, right? So it's like, and they don't mean much, but there's a certain set of principles which are immutable, they're timeless, and they don't change. And when like what we do is we seem to progress in society when, a few people can, call the shots and, outside of, the ability to answer to anybody else. We end up adding layers of complexity, another layer of complexity, and we think complexity is somehow, more advanced, when in reality, the more complex something becomes, we throw a Talibism in there, like becomes more fragile, number one. But number two, it's sort of like we forget what the original, like the root principle was. So we like create all this fluffy crap up here and nothing makes sense anymore. So I think like, morality, ethics, natural law, competence, authority, like those things are immutable. And the more we deviate from those, the more we end up with, these kind of, crazy situations where things don't look right anymore. And I just took some notes here that I want to sort of touch on, is this idea, like my piece was really about how America's like, gone from the land of the free to the land of confusion. And it's not like it happened overnight. Like it's one of those things that happens incrementally. And I always use the example of, Nazi prison guards. They didn't start off day one by throwing people in concentration camps. They started off by, thinking, rumors like, oh, Jews are like weird people because they're different to us. Then it's like, oh, they carry diseases. And then it's like, oh, well, let's just put a star on their shop so that way, people don't shop there. Then it became, well, maybe we should censor them from being able to talk and do things. Then let's throw them in jail. And then, oh, we need workers for the war, so let's do that. And then it's like, oh, well, let's kill them now. So it's all of these things. Tyranny happens incrementally, like derangement syndromes like we see today, or the collapse of America. Like it happened incrementally, and each step we take is a step further away from, these core principles.
Yeah, I was thinking when you're talking there about, you mentioned Bitcoin and how it's radically different, and of course it being digital and everything before Bitcoin. Or if you think about the United States, I was still around when people used photocopiers and Xerox machines and carbon, what do they call them? The carbon copiers. And there was a phrase back then: a copy of a copy of a copy. Like it was like, why can't I read this? It's because it's a copy of a copy of a copy. Right. And this is like the Constitution was iterated, and it was a very nice document. And then it's been all these overrides and executive orders. For example, it's like a copy of a copy of a copy. So you say, well, why is there no justice? Well, because it's a copy of a copy of a copy. Meanwhile, in Bitcoin land, it's digital, it's pristine. It works on first principles, as you've mentioned there, as it pertains to money and store of value, et cetera. And so, I mean, basically, it's the gradual fall into this tyrannical mess is now well underway. Obviously, we're looking at a story here where the troop withdrawal in Syria was false. It was a hoax, and it was the president was unaware that the troops were not withdrawn. He was not told. Right? So that's a copy of a copy of a copy. Well, the Constitution says that, but then we had an executive order, and then we had a caucus, and then we had a sub meeting, and then we had the mainstream media decide. And so now we're at that. I think my question is this: is it you mentioned the voyage of what became the concentration camps over many years. Once the die was cast toward the end, there was no going back, because the level of atrocities were this violation that, we're not going to go back from that. You have now committed the most heinous, atrocious violations of humanity ever. You're not going to go back from that. In America, have we crossed that Rubicon? Are we now irreparably on the path of decline? Is there any coming back? That's my question.
Well, I don't think for the old system. So this is one of the things I think, particularly like people like the Republicans, and because I generally side more with the rational right, call it, generally speaking. The problem is those, and I don't know if this is a saying or if I'm pulling this out of my butt, but it's like you can't change the system from within. You need to start fresh, and America was an example of that. Like the John Locke's and the Adam Smiths of the world couldn't change the United Kingdom, the monarchy, from within. So they went to a new land and they started from scratch. So I think, Bitcoin's an opportunity to start from scratch. I don't know if there's like a going back to a constitution, because, like what you're saying about a copy of a copy of a copy, like, is this idea of dilution. And it's funny, I was speaking to Guy yesterday, and I was talking about how, the world's moved from, we've gone on this crazy chase for abundance and consumption, and abundance with complete, disregard to anything else. Now, there's some things, on the planet where abundance is, good, like, air, for example. But, there's particular things that, need to remain scarce, and that they need, it depends on their founding principles. So, for example, things like time and energy are scarce. Now, if money is supposed to represent time and energy, that should also be scarce. Now, we've come to vilify scarcity as a bad thing, and we've thrown it out the fucking window. And here we are now with this complete moral relativism where we've diluted all meaning, and nothing actually means anything anymore. So, this executive order is now different to this order, to that order. It's a emergency, or it's a, state of panic, or whatever the case is. So there's no foundation. And I think Bitcoin kind of brings us back to this immutable set of truths. And no matter what, Max thinks, or Stacy thinks, or I think, or, Bob down the road thinks, it doesn't matter. Like if we think differently, we're sort of like, we fork off the Bitcoin network and we're somewhere else. Whereas Bitcoin can kind of maintain this objective source of truth. And it really reminds me of like Ayn Rand's work. Is she kind of talks about in what's the face, Atlas Shrugged, that, the derangement of society starts to happen when we, introduce relativism across morality, across ethics, across all of that stuff, when there's no more objective source of truth. And that's where we are today. Like, when I first read Atlas Shrugged, I thought, oh, this is a bit of an exaggeration. But this year's kind of told me it's like, what, she was actually spot on, because, nothing means anything anymore. It's like whoever, you can be a media puppet and you can just say the word science and it's apparently supposed to mean science. It's like, what kind of a world are we living in? And
right.
Yeah,
in economics, they have this term called moral hazard, which is moral relativism for economics. So Alan Greenspan made this famous in the 80s when he was saying that, well, we know that the banks on Wall Street engage in some fraud, but it's needed to create liquidity. That was, paraphrasing, but that was his message. So that was falls under the heading of moral hazard. And now 20, 30, 25, 35 years later, that moral hazard, that wiggle room, as he called it, has become the dominant economic force on Wall Street. There's only wiggle room. I mean, so JP Morgan, their business model has become, they keep 90 cents of every dollar they steal. And, JP Morgan will say, well, that's just a moral hazard. That's, just deal with it. On the subject of John Locke, I was just rereading John Locke because it's somebody that I return to often. And of course, he was pioneering the concept of the social contract back there in the 1600s as part of an Enlightenment thinker. And talking about the contract between the government and the governed, and the trade-off and the quid pro quo, and what does each party give up. And he was talking about the governed, the people, what they give up a lot of rights to the government in exchange for what the government can provide, with the exclusion of one inalienable right, according to John Locke, and that was the right to form a militia. His idea was, if the social contract is broken, the people must revolt. Right. And so he was saying that we give up our rights with the right of forming a militia, because ultimately, if we decide that the government, the person that we've engaged in the social contract with, has betrayed the contract, we have to actually be very, very vigorous in reclaiming our rights. And I think that is seemingly coming back into play, because I think a lot of people are very, very concerned that perhaps their rights have been trampled on into a degree that is irreversibly unacceptable.
Well, we have. So I think an important thing there is, this idea of being able to form a militia. I think, the essence of that idea is that, the contract with government is first and foremost an institution that can provide protection services for private property. And when that no longer, when the government is no longer serving, no longer provides a good service there, we should be able to stand up, or not should be able, but we have this inalienable right to say, well, if you're not protecting me, then I have to protect myself first. And, I can't do it myself, so we need to be able to organize. And that's fundamental. And I guess, in many ways, Bitcoin represents that in a monetary capacity, because, the social contracts become so deranged now that, we are effectively paying taxes to imprison us. There's no more services from government anymore. We can do everything better ourselves. So, Bitcoin kind of helps us stop feeding the beast that is imprisoning us.
Right. Let's go back to this notion of crossing the Rubicon. Because, if the U.S., you say, is dead, America is dead, and America was founded on the principles not only of the French Enlightenment and the Scottish Enlightenment, but also the Roman Republic and the Greek ideas of a republic and democracy. So crossing the Rubicon is those sort of moments when the power elites make the conscious decision. They know that there's a choice to either like empower themselves, enrich themselves, but they have to cross the Rubicon. Okay, once Caesar crossed the Rubicon, the republic was over, and he declared himself dictator. We've had those sort of moments in, when we founded the Federal Reserve. America went to war against England, specifically, as it was John Adams or Ben Franklin said, against the Bank of England. They wanted to get out from the Bank of England, and then we created a Federal Reserve Bank. And that was crossing the Rubicon. And then, of course, FDR seized the citizens' gold in 1933. That was another moment of crossing the Rubicon. And then in 1971, we crossed the Rubicon again. And all of these things, obviously, it's all about game theory, right? And prisoners' dilemmas of like, does Caesar cross the Rubicon, or does he face treason charges and die? Like, does he let the Senate and the wealthy like control everything, or does he come to the rescue of the people? Because remember, he was beloved by the people. Now, Bitcoin to me kind of makes it impossible to cross the Rubicon. You cannot cross the Rubicon in Bitcoin, no matter, and that's part of the game theory of it, is like that people will always cross the Rubicon if given the choice. The powerful will always cross that Rubicon. Because if you set it up under a republic and the Constitution and all these grand ideals, a generation or two or three later, people forget, and somebody comes along and they want all the power, they want all the wealth, they want the glory of the people, and that moment always happens. So Bitcoin prevents the Rubicon from being crossed. What do you think of that?
Spot on. So I think there's a piece in the article where I write about not conspiracies, incentives, and I think that can. What you just said sums up what I tried to push in the article. There is this idea that let's just assume complete innocence. Let's just give the benefit of the doubt to like all the evil people trying to pull things off, like whether it's Soros or Gates or whatever. Let's just say it's just pure incentives. What you have with a handwritten social contract that's an agreement between people is that over time it becomes a copy of a copy of a copy. That it's very easy to have like in the moment an emergency in which you say, look, this time we'll override it, but we won't do it again. And then you create these precedents where again, you to use your words, you end up crossing the Rubicon for a reason. Now, it could have been, in all pure intent, like it could have been for the absolute right reason. Like, we had to go and intervene in World War I, apparently, to crush the Kaisers and, break up the monarchies. Like, apparently Woodrow Wilson had to do that. But in doing that, like, he sold America's soul, and he set up, the new vanguard, which was, the Democratic Republic. And then, you've got this other notion of, I'm writing an article now called Utopias Are the Path to Dystopias. So I don't believe in this notion that we can ever have a utopia, because perfection is non-existent. Like, we were talking with Guy Swan yesterday, and we mentioned, true perfection is imperfect. And, we sort of try in our arrogant, ignorant attempts to, make life better for everyone and make it safer and nicer and cleaner. We try and remove imperfection, not knowing that when you sanitize and when you sterilize imperfection, you actually eliminate life. Like, the most peaceful place on the planet is actually North Korea. Like, there's no crime there. People aren't fighting in the streets, but, you have no choice, so the life has been sucked out of it.
A story of Rodin, the sculptor. In his studio, a student did a sculpture and called over Rodin and said, look, master, this is perfect. And Rodin proceeded to knock an arm off and said, you don't want it to be perfect. That's not aesthetically pleasing. Something to that effect. So perfection has its own dystopian quality about it. However, on that front, there's something about Bitcoin that feels perfect in a way, in that it has almost perfect qualities as money. We know that there's some pieces of the protocol, like the difficulty adjustment and the halving that comes every 4 years, that keep it on this path, a vector, if you will, that seems to be heading toward a perfect place, like a North Star of the cosmos. And to get back to your word about incentives, if in fact we can have a situation or an economy or a world where the incentives are perfect because of Bitcoin, then would the outcomes be perfect?
Well, I don't think it's about perfection. I think it's about natural incentives. So the reason Bitcoin works is because it's natural. Now, could like, for example, could we have let's say in a future world where we're on a Bitcoin standard and nobody can manipulate the money and things like that, will crime and conflict still exist? Yes. We're not talking about removing that, because like there's four fundamental truths in the world and in the universe, which is we live in a world with finite resources. Like that's a truth. We live in the four dimensions of space and time is also finite. Like we can't make more of it. Also, the future is uncertain, so that's something we can't escape. And then fourth, you wrap all of those in this truth that we as individuals are all different and value everything subjectively. And subjectively speaking, we're all different. So when you look at those four truths, you can't escape conflict or some sort of fighting or something. The problem arises when we deviate from nature and the game that we choose to play that allows us to sort of cooperate, which is built on this idea of money. The product of our labor. When someone can sort of co-opt that, then we can create these derangements in society like we have today. So whilst, Bitcoin is almost like this, I guess the incentives or its its resulting effect, seems perfect, but in a way it's also like, it's perfectly imperfect, and it's a hard, like, I don't know, I'm lost for the words here, but I think it's so natural in the way its incentives function that we've actually, in our imperfection as human beings, we actually enable this thing to just be a standard that can't be messed with.
Right. Well, on that front, so the ability for Bitcoin seemingly, however, is to disincentivize crime. And can it achieve a vanishing point where all incentive for crime is vanished? Our friend Knut Svanholm has this great concept that knowing is owning, right? So the differentiation, in other words, private property, sure, is great, but in a Bitcoin world where the incentives skew away from violence and toward cooperation, and it skew away from gaming the system and crime toward a more cooperative environment, and because you're incentivized to do so, because we know from nature that type of cooperation yields incredible, bountiful cornucopia of results, right? We don't have to do jack shit, and we have plenty of energy from the sun, plenty of food from nature. We're the ones that's creating a lot of the scarcity artificially, right? So if that's all disincentivized, I guess my question is this. So I understand those four forces, those four factors, and it's natural, but it seems like Bitcoin is almost unnatural because it does disincentivize a lot of these things that we consider natural. Would you be open to that being a possibility, or do you feel like you're comfortable with that kind of four-dimensional paradigm and that's good enough? Or what do you think?
Well, I just think differences will always exist. We're always going to argue. We're always going to fight about something. We're always, maybe on a long enough time scale, we transcend a lot of these things, and that may be the fact. But maybe by that stage, we're not Homo sapiens in our current, iteration, like, you know, maybe we're something else, but like fundamentally speaking, you know, incentives drive behavior. So like you kind of accurately mentioned, is because Bitcoin disincentivizes theft, and, you know, I think the best way to think about that is it lowers the cost of defense and increases the cost of attack. So therefore, you know, your incentive to go and beat someone over the head to steal their shit versus actually trading with them and doing something yourself changes. You know, I'm not as optimistic about human nature because I've just seen how silly some people can get, and, you know, things like, you know, laziness and sloth and, you know, things like that do exist, and they're hard to sort of weed out. Now, again, on a long enough time scale with, you know, let's say, you know, decentralized, open, free market schooling and education, where, you know, we sort of teach the younger generations about ethics and morals and private property and things like that. You know, maybe over time we can converge away from that, because, again, if you look at the natural world, you know, all other species respect private property. All other like nature's found its own natural equilibrium. And I'm writing another piece on this, which is territory as a biological imperative. Is all species, aside from our crazy ass, now we sort of grew like this, but we've kind of you know, deviated from it. But all species manage their territory, their tribes, their you know, their groups and everything through territorial boundaries, and that permeates throughout every living, every mammalian type living species. And as we've deviated from that, as we've deviated from truths like private property, we've, you know, created distortions. So Bitcoin kind of brings that back in. So, I mean, does that mean, again, we'll eliminate conflict? Probably not, but I think the incentive for conflict drops so much that, you know, maybe conflict takes on a new meaning. Instead of conflict being I'll shoot my neighbor, is I will outcompete my neighbor in producing something better. You know, so I think it just changes the how those things represent themselves.
So that's what I was saying about Bitcoin makes it impossible to cross the Rubicon, because, you know,
Yes.
the Rubicon is crossed because humans by nature are greedy. They're insecure. They're selfish. They want to take stuff for free. They want the adulation of the crowds because they are so insecure. So Bitcoin incentivizes, they know that, you know, all these elaborate structures we have, whether it's religion or the court system, to try to repress that. You know, we've spent all our time, if you watched our interview with Nozomi Hayes, who's a liberation theologist, you know, psychologist, she talks about that this is so much of Western society is about repressing the human, the bad side, the negative, the dark, you know, of greed, of selfishness and stuff like that. So the more selfish and greedy you are, look at any of the great moments in Bitcoin history. It is like those forks. It is like when individuals got like hubris and thought they were the empire. They were the democracy. They are the most important person in this history. And here we saw the same thing, these grandiose, powerful billionaire Bitcoiners who were like, we know better than the users. And, you know, they failed. But what happened? Bitcoin, like, boom, that was when it went up to 20,000, because it showed its power, because it took all of that greed, all of that hubris, all of that selfishness, and it grew more powerful. So that's in a way like Max's sort of notion that it's like unnatural, is like that it's almost like this, like, you know, how, like this sort of force out there that we can't really touch, we can't get to, that black stone in you know, in Mecca, you know, it's just like this weird force that is it draws all of our negative qualities, but turns it into a positive. By all of us greedily looking at number go up, we secure the private property of tens of thousands of Bitcoiners around the world.
100%. Like, me, Marty, and Matt were on a podcast, and like, as we were just sort of riffing, I called it the prospering of the commons. So like every time we've had a commons throughout history, we've had a tragedy of the commons. in our, in our fallibility, we've gone and burnt it up, for everybody, and ended up with nothing. So this is the first time, Bitcoin takes that and transforms it. But I guess, again, it's still predicated on us behaving imperfectly. So it's like, so maybe, I guess what, wait a
minute. You said it depends on us behaving imperfectly. Now, the question is it hacking us, right? I believe that the protocol is self-aware and that it's hacking us to help us. In other words, let me put it this way, and I don't want to go off on a total tangent.
No, I like this.
Let me put it this way. If, in fact, you were the creator of the universe and Earth and its population was your creation, and you looked upon that creation and you thought, this is going to shit, I need to fix it. You could, if God showed up suddenly on the evening news, and I don't mean, a fake God, but I mean the actual God, everyone would freak out. But if God could hack his way into our world using Bitcoin to change our incentives as human beings so that we help ourselves get out of this mess, that would be the way to do it. That would be the way to do it. This could be God's thumbprints are all over Bitcoin.
Dude, so true. So true. No, I could not agree with that more. Like, that is, that's a really, really, like, powerful way to describe,
well, look at it this way. There was always the argument that Bitcoin is going to go into a death spiral, the mining death spiral, by these are core developers for years who thought this, without even understanding the difficulty adjustment that happens every 2 weeks, right? So they don't even know how the protocol works.
Yeah. Well, I guess maybe they knew how the protocol worked, but what they didn't understand was human beings and how, the resulting behavior of this kind of natural incentive system. So I think, whatever or whoever Satoshi was, and whatever Bitcoin means, like, the most important understanding it had, or he had, or they had, was of human nature, and just the fact that if we can, we'll try and get an advantage. And if we can't, we'll do our best still to try and get an advantage, because our human action tends towards, progress. Now, whether we consciously or unconsciously make progress or not, the intention is towards a forward path. And, we sometimes make a royal disaster out of it. And sometimes, we do it well, but at the end of the day, Bitcoin needed to be immune, whether we acted like buffoons or we acted honorably. And that's, again, one of the most profound things. It just leaves me speechless. It's And
finally, so before we have to end here, we're starting with this, the monkey Christ, turning a masterpiece into a blobby cartoon-like character, a cartoonification of it. Where do you expect it from 2021 as we see a new administration? Do you see MMT, which I think is the total cartoonification of a former masterpiece? Are we going to see that? Is that the end of the dollar and then the rise of Bitcoin?
Look, I think this decade is going to be really tough. I think we're going to see more stupidity because, again, now we're at that point where, the classic slippery slope, the incentives are so skewed that there is no going back. So it's only going to get worse and worse. So they're going to have to print more money. They're going to have to go into MMT. They're going to they're going to have to, create new laws to try and band-aid over the clusterfuck that they did and, to create more problems.
So you're saying they're going to have to cross the Rubicon once again.
Again, we're probably going to cross 10 Rubicons,
I'm going to get a toll booth on this river Rubicon because everyone's crossing it back and forth. I'm going to make a killing.
Right. Well, thank you for giving us a masterpiece episode and stepping in to be not the monkey Christ, but the real one. No, we're not calling anybody
Thank Christ.
You know, that's we've seen what happened in the past.
I'm the high priest of Bitcoin.
Oh yeah, Michael Saylor called you that. Okay, if we didn't go to the interview with Sean Lennon, then we're still here and we're wrapping up for the whole entire show. And that means we can get, he's like a rock star. Like, I mean, I'm saying like he's a polymath and like he's into art. Like he's an amazing artist. Like he could draw all sorts of things.
Yeah.
And he's interested in outer space and star weather and all sorts of stuff like that. But at the end of the day, he's a rock star, right? So rock stars throw televisions out windows. They fail to show up for the interview. Like this is part and parcel of what it is to be a rock star.
Yeah, I mean, we had booked Johnny Rotten, and then he never showed up either. And but this is the record. It's called the Claypool Lennon Delirium. This I got. I actually bought this, and this is my copy. It's Blood and Rockets is the key track on this masterpiece. You should the guy who helped create the Orange Pill theme music. He contributed to Bev's work.
Julian Moore. Max is like zero memory.
Julian Moore is the writer of the Orange Pill theme music, and then Sean and his girlfriend Charlotte added some stuff.
Well, added some stuff, important lyrics, right?
Didn't they write the lyrics?
Sean wrote the lyrics.
He did?
Yes.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Max, I tell him something and it goes in that ear and then out the other, and it comes out the other side. It goes in a masterpiece and it comes out the other side as Monkey Christ. So it's just like, that's what it's like living with them every day. I told you, like, we even tried this and it didn't work for us. We tried to become viral hits by watching some videos and seeing like this whole new art form of watching, like, first it started out as watching video games. Game players play video games, and then it's become now watching people listen to music. And those two, they're brothers. Like they are black, and they're brothers as well. They're twin brothers. So twins is the new trend, I think, is their Twitter handle. Their YouTube handle, and they were watching Wonderwall, which is one of my favorite songs. Like I so remember the very first moment I ever heard that when I first moved to London, right in '95, and right when that came out, like right around that time that it came out, and listening to it as I was driving I was a passenger in a car driving across London, and that first moment when they hear Liam Gallagher, saying "Today is gonna be the day." And like they stop, like so shocked at his voice of like how amazing it is. And then they keep on they don't even let him get through a whole like phrase, a lyric. They keep on stopping, like amazed at his voice. And then the more vocal one, the one that's more always talking, he stops and he's like, "Do you know, this guy looks like John Lennon? And in case you guys don't know who John Lennon is, he was the lead singer of the Beatles." And it was like, just this notion, what I was just saying, that like people don't remember Occupy Wall Street 10 years ago. And it's just like this 20-year-old kid, 19-year-old kid, just like, kids, I'm going to tell you, there's a band called the Beatles, and there was a singer called John Lennon. And it was just like, wow, I feel old.
Yeah, well, they're keeping it fresh. They're keeping it young. Watching them listen to these songs, the Phil Collins song with that epic drum break that comes in like 6 minutes or into the song. It's a fantastic moment. Yeah, it was fun. What do they call it? They were going to do, I know, they say, they go, "Welcome to another episode. We're crushing it. We're dropping the beats," or something. And then
I like when they do the strap in.
Oh, they got to put the seatbelt on. Yeah, to put my seatbelt on. This is got to strap in for this. This is pretty epic, for sure. Well, so I don't know, what was the story? Because you were saying we were going to do this, and then what happened?
Well, remember we watched some videos. We watched Chuck Schumer poop his pants. We
Yeah.
watched all sorts of stuff like trying to go viral because
Yeah.
apparently this is what young people like. Generation Z likes this
Then
stuff.
what happened?
So we were trying to get in touch with Generation Z. I think we would have gone viral if we had instead pooped in our pants because I don't think they wanted to see like a Gen X and a Boomer do one of these viral videos
Yeah.
because as far as I could tell, it didn't go viral.
Well, the thing about those guys is they're watching the real video in real time on their monitor. We try to do it by not playing the video, but just assuming that we could cut it in later. So the reaction, what they call it, reactions. So we weren't reacting to anything. We were reacting to nothing.
Yeah,
so
but
that was tough.
But also, like, we've already seen everything. Like, the thing is, like, when like this first guitar riff is playing on the Wonderwall, you know what's coming next.
I know, but see, I think the thing to do is our reaction to their reaction. So they react to Wonderwall and they have that reaction, and then we react to their reaction.
Okay.
I think that would be interesting because I'm 43 years older than they are, right? And I'm like 2 generations removed. And I've heard the Wonderwall when it first came out and all this stuff. So we are reacting to their reaction. I think would be a good reaction video. But
Okay,
we
let's
got to
set
have
it.
it pop up in the video, and you got to be able to freeze frame and say, "Oh, freeze frame," and then react. Right? It's a reaction. Because I think what we were trying to do is we weren't playing the actual video. We were just simulating a reaction.
I was doing more like Alan Pakula. Like, I was doing more cinematic sort of, like thinking we were like method actors, but
Right.
we're not
So-
method actors. And
Yeah, it didn't work. Yeah.
I'm a bit of a method actor, but
Are
I
you?
don't think Max is into it.
Stanislavski?
But you did a good job with Jamie Dimon fighting him. That was
Yeah.
genuine acting. Even
It was,
famous
yeah.
actors contacted us to ask if that was real or not.
Yeah, I can do acting. If I'm required to do acting, I'm suitable. A certain range of roles. I don't have a big range, but I can play the sadistic banker very well. I can play the outrage, justifiable outrage, or what do you call it? Outrage,
Just indignant outrage.
Indignant outrage. I'm very good. I can act that very well. Play that role very well.
We still get people who ask us, like, who genuinely think that Jamie Dimon came onto the show and Max Kaiser beat him up.
Yeah.
Like, there are still people who think that was real. I'm like, okay, wait. Jamie Dimon's American. That guy was British, had a British accent. And, like, it's just, it was so convincing, though, your acting.
It was so convincing in that scene that people really believed that was Jamie Dimon on the set I was beating up.
Yeah.
That's the power of my acting on screen was, so powerful, and it left an indelible impression on people that's still talked about today.
Well, speaking of masterpiece, we're going to...
I thought they were going to say masturbate because of that Jeffrey Toobin thing.
Well, I don't want to go too far. I want to play an advertisement from thesunexchange.com/orange pill, but we're going to play that in like a minute or two because I want to keep a step between that and that word. But I also want to point out that we got this Citadel 21 from Hodlnut. That's a big controversial thing, right? Hodl or hodl? Which one do you see? So, this is supporting our
What
whole...
is that?
It's a magazine called Citadel 21.
Oh,
We all have
really?
citadels, the Bitcoin
Well, I've
citadels.
heard about this.
And there are 21 million Bitcoin.
Oh, yeah.
And so here are some writings, really interesting stuff.
Looks like the Tower of Babel.
Bitcoin, all sorts of stuff, right? And they actually have a piece about Bitcoin. The medium is the message, and they're saying Bitcoin is the medium, and it is the message. So I recommend you get that because it's really fascinating. And now I think it's time to go to the advertisement from our sponsor, thesunexchange.com/orange pill.
That's impossible.
thesunexchange.com/orange pill.
Sun Exchange is the world's first peer-to-peer solar leasing platform. Earn Bitcoin solar power in communities in Africa and be part of the new world economy. Visit thesunexchange.com/orange pill and start monetizing sunshine today.
Okay, and before we go, Max, what were you saying about a rabbit?
Oh, in this Citadel 21 magazine, they apparently you can 3D a rabbit. So I didn't know that. That seems like something new to me. It's pretty cool.
Well, if you go down the rabbit hole, you don't want to go alone, right? You need a trip sitter. And Max and I are trip sitters for, this segment of Orange Pill Podcast every Sunday. And then we do a microdose usually on every Wednesday. Sometimes it's on Tuesday or Thursday.
I'm going to read this magazine.
Max has told me that for the last 2 or 3 weeks. And then
Citadel 21.
And then every time I give it to him, he acts like he's never seen it before. So
this is the same magazine?
This is the same magazine. And
Bitcoin is the message. You just said that.
Okay, so this episode has officially turned into Monkey Christ. And that's what has happened.
Wow.
But I hope you enjoyed the cocktail party. I hope you got a lot of questions answered and you had a good time. And I'm sorry that we didn't have Sean this episode, but we'll have him in an upcoming one.
Hopefully. See ya.